a sclerotic democracy with not a lot of voter participation, and so that the rules can continue to be rigged in the back rooms. That's the vision. They don't care if working class Republicans don't vote as long as they stay in power.
I want to tease out this zero sum thing because, like, why do you think? Well, let's start with the zero sum formulation that you make in the book, because zero sum has come up on this program quite a bit over the past couple of years, particularly in the sort of the Trump era, and maybe more in what that concept of the psychological wage of whiteness. But talk about how the fallacy that you see in the zero sum in the context of your book.
Well, that was really one of the first kind of light bulb aha moments for me, was a bunch of sociological research showing that white people increasingly see race as a zero-sum competition that they are losing. And so anything that could help Black people is something that they will, many white folks will really organize against, even if it could also help them. Because there's a sense that, there's only one ladder. There's only one rung on that ladder, and it's either going to be you or me, right? Profit on one side, loss on the other. Any gain for people of color has to come at white folks' expense. And that's really the formulation that has been used by the elites to divide and distract. And so you start to get, you see it today in our current politics, right? You see it with the right wing's reaction to what is an enormously popular agenda from the Biden-Harris administration, which is to divide, right? To make the takeaways be the slim pieces of racially targeted help, like for Black farmers, for example, who, because they don't want us to know our history, they assume that nobody will know how violently racist and exclusionary the USDA has been throughout its history, and denying Black farmers any kind of access to government benefits. And so we finally get a little bit of repair from that harm. And in a bill, the American Rescue Plan, that had something for virtually every family in America, that's what they lead with, right? This is all just a big giveaway to Black people, right? To get that racial resentment up and to make white voters reject what could be a generation changing, what I call a refilling of the public pool with the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan. This is massive relief to working and middle class families of all races. And yet they want to talk about Dr. Seuss. They want to talk about cancel culture. They want to gin up that racial resentment so that white voters will see it through a zero sum.
I feel like there's a little bit of aiding and abetting of this zero sum phenomenon in discourse on the left as well, right? Where it's like, is it class? Is it the economy? Or is it racism that's driving like the right wing in this way? I feel like, intersectionality is a word that isn't used enough, but I mean, like, can you talk about a little bit about how we could view this struggle on the left in a more constructive way, as opposed to just treating it as a zero-sum game, even just implicitly in our discourse about it?
Right. Well, this is that question and that challenge is something that animated Ian Haney Lopez out of Berkeley University and University of California, Berkeley, and Anat Shenker-Osorio and I to design a project which we called the Race Class Narrative a number of years ago, that's still living in many formations, including an organization called We Make the Future and Ian's Race Class Academy. It's this idea of, okay, so if you're trying to pull together a multiracial coalition to deal with rising inequality, but that has to tend to racial justice as well, what's the story, right? Well, what is the story that you tell so that you're not privileging one or the other? And what we determined was that a message that can beat both Trumpism and a colorblind economic populism that ignores race is not one that only talks about race in terms of disparities, but rather one that talks about race in terms of the way that the plutocrats use it to divide us, the way that race is actually a tool of the greedy few. And so you're both getting a populist message in there that talks about the rigging of the rules, and you are not being silent on the massive animating force in most people's lives, which is their identity, and the most potent tool of the right? So if you only give a sort of colorblind Sanders message somebody can nod and agree, and then they walk out and they hear Fox News and Trump and all of that. And they don't know what to do with that. They don't know what to do with the pointing the finger at Black and brown folks. Is it right? Is it accurate? Certainly seems easier than taking on the powerful to like kick my struggling neighbor, and to make myself feel better for feeling, better than people who are struggling. And so what the race class message does is it helps to inoculate people against the dog whistles. And because it says that's what the elite does, is that they point the finger at brown and Black families, at new Americans, at immigrants. And so the next time you hear that, you're a little bit smarter about what's happening. And so I am endlessly frustrated by kind of what I think is a really stupid debate where some leftists want to say, race hurts us. Right? Talking about race hurts us. And it's like, well, then talk about it smarter, because there's no such thing as not talking about it. There's no such thing as not communicating about it, right? Because people are hearing it all the time.
Right.
If you're silent on it, you're just not fighting on the terrain that, frankly, we've been losing on for so long with white voters.
So, okay. So would it, and so, I hear that, and I think we actually had, Ian Haney on, Lopez on, specifically for the project, some time ago.
Yeah, he wrote a great book called Merge Left, so it might have been that, yeah.
And so, if it is the case that, and I guess it is zero sum insofar as that if we really include the sort of the plutocrat, or however you want to call it, the capitalist class on some level, right? Somebody's going to have to give up some of the goods.
Yes.
You're not
it's not zero sum as between people who are currently struggling. Yes, the wealthy are going to have to give something up, right. But I'm sure they'll figure out a way to be okay.
I'm sure. I have no doubt. But so. On one hand, it's a messaging issue, right? Insofar as like understanding the way that race has been leveraged as a way of preventing or obscuring this dynamic where you have plutocrats, oligarchs who are hoarding the wealth on some level, and in terms of like a cause and effect, right? Like, is this, when we say like, you cite the Great Compression, which is that period between the 50s and the 60s when we had a broadened middle class, or at least a broadened white middle class in this country, and government programs that everybody was fine with. And I think there's plenty of I can't remember who out of Princeton did the research that showed that, like, as soon as it was opened up to Black people, all of a sudden there was a problem with it. But what if this is a question of capitalism, just period, in terms of like, and that Great Compression, like Piketty argues, was that was the anomaly. And that in this system, even if it happens to be race that is used in this context. I mean, does race have a unique ability, I guess what I'm asking, to be leveraged to make a capitalist system even more capitalistic? Or I mean,
yes.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get at, like, are we,
yes.
Is the racism which is just being used here obscuring the problem with capitalism, and is the idea that sequencing, you deal with these issues of race and then you deal with the issues of capitalism?
No, it's that lowering racist, inoculating white voters against racial dog whistles and against, self-defeating divide and conquer tendencies will help build the coalition to take on concentrated wealth and power under capitalism. That's what I'm saying, is that it's not like you deal with the race issues over here as like qua race issues. And I'm not saying that, everybody has to be less, we have to solve racism in order to make any progress. But what I am saying is that we need, we do need in our politics and in our organizing for families to understand that we're pretty much the same, right? That, like, when it all comes down to it, we are all animated by the same needs and desires to live a decent life, to have our basic needs met, to have a shot at fulfilling our dreams, and that the racial stereotypes that are so endemic to our politics are what cut off human empathy and therefore solidarity. And I talk in the book about how there are all these dividends that we can unlock, solidarity dividends, if we can come together across lines of race to do things that we know are in our mutual self-interest.
To the extent that that it's not a zero sum once you deal with the plutocrats, in terms of economics and benefits that one can have in society. What do you do with the white guy who watched TV 40 years ago and was centered in everything he saw? Mm-hmm. And when he called in for customer service, it was just, there was no press 1 or 2 for this or that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think what you don't do is let that white guy's, sense of grievance about that, like, torch the planet, right? Which is really what's happening, right? You know what I mean? It's like we all have our issues, right? There are a lot of things I don't like. But I'm not willing, and this is the difference, right? I'm not willing to, to vote against my own interests, to keep Republicans in power just so that maybe I might get, not have to have a sensitivity note before a violent movie or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's all out of whack, right? The cultural grievance. So I don't do anything about the cultural grievance because I don't care about the cultural stuff as much as, like, I want our economy to work. I want us to solve big problems together. So, I just want to minimize that as something that should be a determining factor in the greatest country on earth.
We're in agreement about that.
No,
but
I'm saying,
you are. If the idea is we want to inoculate, folks from the argument that is going to emanate from the right about a broader grievance, right? Because it's the concept of, like, hey, they're getting, black people are getting special Obama phones. Mm-hmm. And, part of that is, like, they're getting benefits. And so I don't like that program, but part of it, or black farmers are getting benefits, but part of it is also, like, that message in their minds is consistent with, like, I turn on a Cialis commercial and there's a black guy there. What happened to me? I used to be centered. Or, it used to be like, I'm watching TV and whoever it was there was servicing me in somewhere. Maybe it was my mom. Maybe it was, my wife. But it was so, like, what is it? I mean, and I understand this is sort of outside that portfolio, but it feeds into those narratives, right?
Oh, it sure does. I mean, I think people have to have a more durable, resilient sense of self-worth that is not contingent on feeling better than others, and the exclusive. White men are a third of the population, and they're 2/3 of the people, in office, right? I mean, it just being the dominant culture, identity, class is not necessary in order to have a decent life and a good life and to be happy. And, I think about it in terms of this conversation about white privilege, right? I mean, what racial justice advocates want is not to make white people afraid of the police, and white people have, crappily funded public schools, and white people not have as much access to healthcare, right? We want everybody to have those things. But if what was really an important part of it was the feeling that you got it because you were somehow better than the rest of your fellow Americans, and you're going to have to give that up, right? You're going to have to give up the advantage. But in a society that racial justice advocates are seeking, advantage is not the price of a happy life, right? It's actually, we all have those things. And so you sort of have to disentangle how much of the privilege is about just getting things that are scarce because we live in a brutal hierarchical society with where we're sitting in the bottom of a drained pool and we don't have a right to